And we're back here on episode 350 here on Couch Coach Lab. We have a special guest, a friend of the program, our guy, Zach Joachim. What's going on, Zach?
Chris, what's up, my friend? It's good to see you. I miss you when it's not the VCU season and I'm seeing you at the Siegel Center all the time.
I know, right? Yeah, I definitely miss you as well, man. And it's funny, like the summertime is usually, like I said, you probably see each other maybe once or twice a week, during the winter months and all that. And now, coming together in the summer. Definitely appreciate you for coming on today, obviously. Richmond Times-Dispatch reporter, also deputy editor, and also proud alum of Maury High School. So definitely shout out to 757 legend. So shout out to
my Commodores, who I would throw in there are probably in the conversation for like the best athletic high school in the state right now. Like all around. Yeah. Obviously the football program, super successful. Basketball program's been in state finals in recent years. A lot of strong sports programs there. So I am a proud alum.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's a lot going on, especially at Moore, and obviously, with being a Springer alum, I definitely, you guys been somewhat of a thorn in the side as of late, but yeah, so.
Some good battles over the years. I think there's some mutual respect there too. It's funny, like I always love the 804-757 rivalry. And I've driven that stretch of 64 more times in my life than I can count. And I'm one of probably the few people that feels like at this point in my life, like I've lived in Richmond for 10 years and I don't know, I don't want to pick a side of that. Like I love those matchups whenever Richmond area teams play 757 teams. And I think there's some animosity there for sure. You want to win, but I think there's also a great deal of mutual respect for a lot of great athletes and programs that those two areas have.
Yep, absolutely.
We both hate Nova together.
Yeah. And so, I'm always curious about this with you, Zach, because, as far as what inspired you to actually get into sports journalism?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I was actually thinking about it this week because we had obviously the really terrible news in the Richmond area about Jalen Martinez, who is a young rising star in the local basketball scene, an extraordinary young man by all accounts. The son of Sierra Martinez and Joey Rodriguez, grew up around the VCU program. He was beloved, but it's also, I think, been a touching and positive week in terms of how the local sports community has rallied around the Martinez and Rodriguez families. UR coach Chris Mooney put out a statement. Women's coach at Richmond, Aaron Roussel, knew Jalen personally, and they've both been really supportive. And it made me think about the fact that my mom is from New Orleans. So I went to New Orleans a lot as a kid. I was there shortly before Katrina with her. And then there's one of the experiences in my childhood that'll always stand out to me. She drove me through the 9th Ward, which is one of the neighborhoods in New Orleans that was hit the worst by Hurricane Katrina. And that was like one of my first experiences with mass human suffering as a kid, right? Was seeing that and seeing the destruction wrought by Katrina. And we didn't go to the Saints' first game back in the Superdome, but we watched it from home. And I remember my mom, screaming, who dat, saying they're going to beat them Saints, right, at the TV and crying a lot during that game. And the Saints beat the Falcons, I think, that night. And I genuinely believe, that was not a good Saints team competitively, but I genuinely believe, the 85 Bears, the best teams of the Patriots and Cowboys and Steelers dynasties could have walked into that building and nobody would have beat the Saints that night because they just had, the energy of that community after what it had been through coming together around the team that represents it was beautiful, and it was so powerful. And that was one of those early experiences, I think, that showed me, what sports can do to galvanize a community. And so I think that's what inspired me to get into sports journalism. Those are the stories that I love writing the most, when you can see that sports can be something that, whatever people's differences are, brings them together. And in moments of trauma like that can contribute to healing a lot, right? I think of Gabe Henderson was a wide receiver at Deep Run. I think it was 2020. I want to say it's a name that a lot of people in the Richmond area will remember. That was a terrible tragedy. He died on a boating accident in Lake Anna. And I remember covering Deep Run games later that year. And it was beautiful, seeing all of the signs, all the hugs, all the tears, everyone coming together around that football team. And that, so instances like that are why I got into sports journalism, because I really believe that sports are one of the best human connectors in the world, right? And especially when we got a time around the world where so much can divide us, sports and like the community aspect of them is more important than ever. And that's why I love covering them.
Absolutely. Like you said, definitely well said. Like you said, it brings everybody together. It brings from a social, economic, everybody kind of comes together, and in those type of moments. But yeah, absolutely, for sure.
I have loved watching the Ukrainian national soccer team in recent years, right? With everything that country's going through right now. Another example that comes to mind from an international level, from a local level, whether it be high school or youth sports or whatever. It's always awesome to see that power that sports can have, and I love covering moments like that.
Absolutely. And like you said, you've been here for 10 years, and I always find it kind of curious how people look at kind of the sports landscape, essentially when you first got here compared to kind of what it is now. How has it changed since you've been here when you first got here in Richmond?
I mean, the first things that come to mind are not exclusive to the Richmond area. I don't think, right, with the shifting landscape of college sports, NIL and the transfer portal and Tony Bennett leaving UVA and all the reasons that he did, right? I think that's really trickled down, right? I mean, you see a high school transfer portal these days with kids shifting schools. And so a lot has changed just in kind of the cultural fabric of athletics that's not specific to Richmond. That's around the country and in some respects around the world, right? But I think exposure for the Richmond area is super strong, right? We've had some great athletes come out of here. It's probably increased in those years, I want to say. I love seeing new coverage outlets and entities pop up. 804 Sports Media does some great stuff, and I follow them on Instagram. My friend Michael Phillips, who used to be my editor here at the Times-Dispatch, is at the Richmonder, and they're an online-only publication that are doing great coverage of the area. And so I like to see kind of like the journalism landscape evolving a little bit to fit, the age of social media and a different time in terms of how news spreads and how we cover stuff, right? Because like I work at a print publication, but we're very much these days digital first in terms of the content that we try and produce. I'll always remember I did a great story last year on Dexter Richardson, who's a kid at Thomas Dale, football player, basketball player, track athlete, who collapsed and passed out during a gym class and found out that he had a heart condition that he ended up having to have open heart surgery. And a really traumatic moment for he and his family, but it ended up being a beautiful story because the next year he was back on the court. And if that hadn't happened, he might not have known, until a later situation in his life, and it could have been dangerous, right? More dangerous than it was. And he was on the front page of the paper, and his parents texted me the day that they gave him the paper, and they were like, "Yeah, we gave it to Dex today." And he was like, "So this is what a newspaper looks like." Because it was the first time at 16 years old that he'd ever picked one up, and he was on the front page of it, right? So how people consume news has changed a lot. And so, again, not exclusive to the Richmond area, but I've enjoyed seeing like how coverage and how content has evolved in that time and being part, right, of an industry that's trying to grow and adapt with the different ways that people consume news on their phones and digitally in 2025.
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring up the point about as far as a 16-year-old seeing themselves on an actual cover of a newspaper and not knowing what a newspaper is. And it's funny, I always feel like it's a generation thing. And I've always talked about like, I'm 40, so when I was a teenager, I used to always get the Times-Dispatch and get and read the sports and all the type of stuff, and it would come to my my doorstep. And that's funny, crazy how like now those times have changed. Like now, you have a phone that gets all the alerts for all your teams. Like, we used to, if go to the library or go, get it at home and read the box score. And it's just crazy, like you said, how it kind of evolved. Yeah, so absolutely, yep.
Even just when I started in 2018, man, we had a team of part-timers who covered high school sports. And my first job was taking calls from coaches, like on the landline, after games and they were calling in scores, right? And we were putting them in the paper. And things have changed, and I wish we still were able to do that. We don't have the staffing to do that. And how coaches report scores and game changer and everything like that has changed a lot. So I guess that'd be another facet to that question that you made me think of there. It's just how we cover it has changed so much just in those 7 years in terms of the responsibilities of a sports reporter. And coaches and players have had to adapt too, just like journalists have, right? But we're all in it together. And I think that it's not a positive or a negative thing. It's just industries change, right?
Yeah, and like I said, and now just an innovative way to doing it. And it's funny, like, and I remember too, we used to have to call in for the scores. So that's another like that, trying to show my age and all, but yeah, back, maybe about 20, about a little over 20 years ago, you used to have to do that. Especially, so yeah, it's definitely has changed. And I'm always, like with you, I'm always more so, I'll put it this way. I'm kind of fascinated kind of how, like, your demeanor in when you're covering these games, especially considering the fact with you, obviously with us covering VCU, you went to VCU, and I'm always fascinated by kind of how you're able to keep yourself composed in those type of situations. So how do you balance being objective as a reporter while also rooting for the success of local athletes that you cover for years?
Oh, it's hard sometimes, right? That's definitely a big challenge of the profession. In the VCU George Mason A10 final, I'm not gonna lie, man, my hands were shaking during that game. Genuinely, like I had to tell myself to take deep breaths because I was trying to type and do live updates at the time, and my hand was shaking because I obviously care a lot. I went to VCU, and that's not just covering my alma mater, which is a beat that will always mean more to me than anything in the world ever could. I could be covering, I tell people this all the time. I told Phil Martelli this when I was in his office a few weeks ago. Like, I could be covering Real Madrid, the Cowboys, the Yankees, the biggest sports entities in the world, and it will never mean to me what the VCU beat does. And so that's hard sometimes because obviously, people generally, your interest and engagement in the stories is always better when the team is successful too, right? That's not even just like a rooting interest thing. That's just, you want people to read your stories and engage with the content. And if VCU is going to the NCAA tournament and you're writing about that, then that's going to be, a lot more engaging to readers than if they had a terrible season, right? And they're not going anywhere. And so you're always trying to balance that for sure, because on the flip side, you have a job to do. And if, God forbid, a VCU coach got a DUI or something like that, right? Or like something is difficult legally going on with athletics or with a player or something like that, you have to cover that objectively. And you have to be able to tell those stories because that's your responsibility as a reporter into the community. So that's always a difficult balance to find that I think I've grown a lot with in recent years as I've encountered some of those circumstances and have been able to learn and grow through them. And it's also like you follow these teams throughout the year. Whether that be VCU or at the high school level, right? And so if you're covering like Mills Godwin girls soccer, I covered them for a few games at the end of this season, and you interview the players afterward and you get to know them, right? And so all of a sudden when they're in a state quarterfinal game or a state semifinal game and you're covering them against a school from Northern Virginia and you've never interviewed any of those athletes, like, yeah, your heart wants them to win because, if they lose afterward, you're interviewing crying players who are sad that their season is over and that they're not going to be able to play with their friends anymore, and those are really, really tough interviews. I remember, I think you were there in that press conference after the VCU's loss to Dayton at the Siegel Center this season, right? And Joe Bamisile, who's one of my favorite human beings and athletes I've ever had the privilege of covering, I asked him, Joe missed a free throw that could have tied that game right at the end of it, and it was a big moment. And I think it's my responsibility as a reporter to ask about that moment. And Joe gave me not the friendliest response because Joe was obviously frustrated in that moment, understandably, right? And so moments like that are really hard where you have to say, I developed a relationship with this athlete. I care about this athlete as a human being and I want to see them succeed. But at the same time, I have a job to do and I have to ask difficult questions in moments where they don't. So you're always trying to navigate that, man. But to answer the question, yeah, it's a big challenge of the profession that I think I've gotten better about. Especially in the couple years on the VCU beat, I had to learn quickly. I think Sean Robertson our friend told me to tone down the homerism maybe a couple times in that first season, and so I appreciated that from Sean. And Sean, who's did so tongue in cheek and comedically and supportively, but I still appreciated him saying that because that perspective is important to have, and it's a challenge. It is for any reporter who's got a connection to a program or a team that they cover.
Yeah. Like you said, and that's how I was saying, and I've noticed that with you as well. So that's why I look at that and it's like, yeah, that's what you want to kind of remain stoic, because especially like you said, you do develop these relationships regardless of kind of how people think, but it's still a human nature with it. And like you said, you're on this beat from, all year. So you think to yourself, the human instinct, you're going to develop some form of a relationship with everybody that's involved with this organization. So it's like you said. So, and I've peeped at how you've done a great job of doing that. So I was always, as far as, and we've talked about this before too, kind of like how to kind of keep it kind of even keel, kind of keep the emotions kind of on low. But yeah,
that means a lot, you saying that, because I certainly had some growing pains in that regard in the first year or so. Like I obviously have like VCU gear. I went to VCU. I can't wear it, you have to kind of internally turn that fan off in yourself. But at the same time, there's a balance with, like, I think in 2025, like, I'm a huge Arsenal fan. A lot of the media that I consume, I watch like Arsenal Fan TV. I listen to Ars Blog, which is like a popular podcast. And those people are all fans. And they say we when they're referring to the club, right? And they're wearing Arsenal jerseys and stuff. And at the end of the day, like, you have outlets like Fansided, like every team, VCU Ram Nation, right? Obviously, like Matt Shelton does a great job with his coverage, and that is all made up of people who are unabashedly fans. And so you are trying to balance like being a neutral reporter with the reality that in today's sports landscape, a lot of the content that people want to consume, they don't want like, I am a neutral reporter and this is the score of the game and this is the leading scorer and it's just super straightforward. Like, they do want something that's framed from someone who cares about the program. So you're always trying to find that balance.
Absolutely. And so now kind of lead into that's just like, which has been a crazy offseason. And it's funny because we talked about it. And actually I had Ben on. Shout out to our guy Ben. And we talked about how crazy from the A10 championship to within 5-10 day window, how just rapid, like to a point. So just talk about just your thoughts on just this offseason in general.
John Rothstein's We Sleep in May has come to mind a great deal over the last couple of months. Maybe it should be We Sleep in June, because it felt like after the season ended with the coaching change and all the roster turnover, when you go into the transfer portal, things didn't settle down until like later May with VCU, right? And Phil Martelli was settled in as the new head coach, and they'd put the roster together. So it felt like once, VCU lost to BYU and the regular season was over, things only heated up from there in terms of the news cycle. I think it's super positive on the whole, right? In terms of what Martelli and his staff have done with putting together this group, and a lot of guys with high major experience. Jadrian Tracy from Oregon played in the NCAA tournament. Tyrell Ward from LSU was one of the best shooters in the SEC 2 years ago. Ahmad Noel was a huge recruit out of high school and came from UConn. They've grabbed some really exciting pieces. Sammy Jackson committed last night, right? Number one recruit in Pennsylvania, had interest from Texas and Indiana. So VCU was going head to head with some blue bloods, right? Some big time programs. I think it demonstrates the NIL resources and the pull that VCU has relative to other mid majors in the country. It's really positive. I think Phil is an incredibly down to earth guy. I enjoyed my conversation with him a great deal. I know all the reporters, Adam Epstein, Michael Phillips, Mike Barber, who've talked to him. I've heard the same things about them, just saying that he's a super open guy who appreciates the coverage and is a lot of fun to talk to. And I've enjoyed this staff too. Like on Twitter, seeing Chris Cole and Luke St. Lifer and Brendan Phelps and the emojis, that's been super exciting for me that they're getting in on the emoji party. Because I would like to think that I'm kind of the guy who started that around the VCU scene, right, in terms of the commitments and everything. And they're putting up the gifts whenever they got guys committing. So super positive vibes from this staff. A lot of excitement nationally throughout the college basketball world with the team that they've put together. And not only the guys that they brought in, but the guys they kept. right? I think people would have been heartbroken if this team lost Brandon Jennings, right? Who's a local kid who became a beloved fan favorite last year with what he did for this team, who is a exemplary ambassador of this program, who I see as kind of the successor to Zeb Jackson in that regard, just in terms of like community engagement and kind of being the face of VCU. Like, them being able to retain the guys that they did. Christian Furman, I would have been heartbroken if Firm left. I love that guy. He's like one of the most genuine smiles I've ever seen. Like, I love what this staff has done. I love the vibe that they've brought. And also, I'd like to say too, I'm happy for Coach Odom. I am. Like, obviously this fan base is scarred by the coaching turnover, and rightfully so. Like, it sucks to be losing coaches on a consistent basis. That's tough. But Ryan Odom spent part of his childhood sitting on Ralph Sampson's knee and riding his bike into University Hall up in Charlottesville and going to practices when his dad Dave was an assistant under Terry Holland. Like, Ryan is where I think he was always destined to be. He succeeded a lot in 2 years at VCU, and I think that this parting of ways has been perhaps as amicable as any I can remember in VCU history. Because, like, when Mike Rhodes and Will Wade left, there was a lot of angst, there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of consternation, there was a lot of arguing in those times, right? And I think that even though the coaching search was wild there for a little bit, and Phil Martelli was not on my short list. I don't think he was on anyone's short list outside of the program to start. I think they arrived at the right guy. I think UVA got the right guy. And I'm looking forward to some VCU UVA home and homes in these next couple of years. I don't think it's going to start this year. I think it'll probably be the season after. But college basketball in the state of Virginia is better when those two programs are playing. And I think with the strong relationship that Ryan and Ed still have, that's definitely going to happen.
Yeah, and the emoji gate started during the coaching search, and it was because we were all like, all right, what's going on here? Because it's like how to interpret it. We like, okay, is he talking about a game? Is he talking about what's going on? And then being able to decipher kind of after the fact, I was like, okay, now this all makes sense. So
I'm glad people enjoyed that, man. And I also some people can get angry about it in the comments, but I would ask people to understand that, like, sometimes you're hearing things as a reporter that you can't report directly and explicitly. And so that's why, like, the emojis are fun, they're light, but there's also a utility to them, right? Because there are things that you want to put out there that you got off the record, right? And you can't burn sources. You can't go out and because people would know where that came from. Right. And so you're hearing things behind the scenes that you can't go out and say explicitly, but you also kind of want to give people a hint as to what is going on. And so that's what I'm trying to do a lot of the time with that, is I'm trying to kind of point people in the right direction and give updates that aren't explicit when I can't put a real report out there yet.
Yeah, because if you reveal your source, that is the number one cardinal sin. You're not
going to have that source anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And he'll be an outsider, for sure. Like,
people have to be able to trust you, right? To know that you're not gonna go forward with something that was told to you in confidence. That's a huge part of the job. And if you don't have that trust, then you're not going to get the information that you need.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, it is definitely a cardinal sin. So, and obviously, Zach, you've just knocked it out of the park with so many like stories and features. But what is one story or feature that you're the most proud of?
I'm glad you asked that. I think my favorite story that I've done in the past year, and maybe like my favorite story that I've done in my career so far, was about the marathon, the Richmond Marathon this past year, which I ran, and which it was a joy to be able to experience and to cover. Like, covering the running community has been one of my favorite things over the last couple of years, because you hear so much just about what it's done for people in their life and making them live a healthier lifestyle, right? Improving their relationships with people. I've met a lot of friends through the running community. Richmond has some great running clubs. And I covered the marathon, and Christopher David, who's an 80-year-old runner, it would have been his 88th marathon in his life, suffered a cardiac arrest about a mile into it, collapsed on Broad Street. And Tiffany Fleming Johnson, who is a sports backers marathon training coach and also a nurse in a cardiac unit at VCU Health, was running not far behind him, heard the cries for help, and she administered CPR. She shocked him with an AED, and she saved his life. And so talking to Chris and Tiff about that experience was really emotional. It was an honor to tell that story, that people trust you with something as heavy as that, because it's very much a life and death situation, right? Hearing about the role that running has had in both of their lives. Chris said that it saved his life twice now, even though it also almost killed him once. And Tiff said that it has saved her life too. After she had her daughter and was kind of getting back into physical activity afterward, and all the life lessons that she's learned through it. I think that's my favorite story, definitely, that I've done over the past year, and one of my favorites that I've done in my career. Just to kind of see the running community come together over those two wonderful people. I think Tiff is a superhero, right? And Chris called that a miracle. If it had happened in any other circumstance in life, he might not be here. So to have her right there running behind him to save his life was extraordinary. And they've stayed really close since that day. And their dream is, believe it or not, Chris, after having double bypass surgery, wants to run the Richmond Marathon again in 2025. And their dream is to qualify for Boston together. So that was super touching, and I think is probably my favorite story that I've done in my career. I'd throw another one out there too. Chris, this was a while ago. I think this was like 2019, 2020, but it was one of the early ones that inspired me. Chris Wakefield is a girls volleyball coach at Mills Godwin, prominent volleyball coach in the area, was on dialysis, needed a kidney transplant. And long story short, he was dying. He was to the point where, he was wondering whether he was far enough on the transplant list that he was going to get a kidney in time to save his life. And you have to go through a lot of blood testing to figure out who's a kidney match that you can take an organ from. And the mom of two of his players was a match, and she donated her kidney to him and saved his life. So that's another one of my favorites that I've told. And to the kind of hearkening back to your first question, any of those stories that you can tell that are about much more than, like, I love covering VCU games. That's a dream come true. I love, writing the basics about the star player and who won and who lost and going to the NCAA tournament. But the stories that mean the most to me, are those sports stories about community and about love. And a lot of the time about life and death, and about, just kind of seeing life through the lens of sports. And those stories are a couple great examples of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we might have kind of alluded to this already, potentially. I think I have potentially in a sense. But if you could cover any sporting event in the world, what would it be and why?
I think definitely the Olympics, which I dream of covering someday, just because, like, that's part of the reason I love the marathon too, and that event in Richmond every day. And part of the reason I wanted to run one myself, because there's a reason that the marathon is on the last day of the Olympics, right? It's kind of seen as like the pinnacle of athletic achievement and driving our bodies to the limit, right? For the sake of the love of sports. And the Olympics are just kind of that moment where the world comes together. And there's been so many instances throughout history, right, where you had political divides, and global trauma, and strife that people were going through, where the Olympics brought everyone together, and it was a platform to talk about those things and to have really important discussions. And it was also a reminder about what I think is one of the most beautiful things that brings us together, and that's sports, right? Just as a human race. And so I definitely say the Olympics, because I think the World Cup too, would love to cover. I'm hoping to maybe get an opportunity to, when it's in the United States here in the immediate future, because kind of those global sporting events, I think, are that most beautiful example of bringing the world community together on one stage, through something that connects all of us, and that's our love for sports.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you might have an opportunity in 2028. And you know what's so crazy? I always said, hopefully in my lifetime, that we can get one in the DMV area, and we can kind of get some of the residual of it. Like, because I don't know, were you here when they had the cycling race in 2015?
Yeah. So actually, it's funny that you asked that. I was a freshman at VCU. I had just moved to Richmond for the first time, and so immediately in that time, I didn't really know what was going on. I was just glad that I had a week off of school. And they had the little bridges. If there's anyone who was in the area and at VCU at that time that remembers that. That was crazy. They built the little like walkway bridges over like a lot of the different intersections. I don't know what the logistics of that looks like in terms of making those permanent, but I thought that was the coolest thing. And I've always wished they would like bring them back because it was good for traffic safety too, right? Because all the students were just able to walk over the street, and you could stand on the little bridge above Main Street and watch bikes go under you in that race. And that was awesome. And yeah, that's a great example of a world athletic community coming to Richmond. That was the coolest thing. And it's had fun ramifications for anyone who enjoys the James River Park system like I do afterward, because a lot of the North Bank Trail, the Buttermilk Trail, I think they were part of the races. And so a lot of those trails were really effectively renovated in that time to fit the bike race. And now they're beautiful hiking and biking trails. So that was an awesome time for Richmond. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I was hoping if we were to get it, like as far as the DMV area, that we could have that cycling portion of it, because I loved it. I think that's when I really, even though I've lived here all my life, but I think that was the moment when I really fell in love with Richmond, was during that cycling race, because I just loved, just like you said, everybody kind of came together. You just, like you said, it was well done. Like as far as like you said, it's able to navigate throughout, and it was awesome.
And sure. It's awesome because it, like, I don't know if you're a big cycling fan. Aside from that, I'm not in particularly, but I loved watching it. And that's part of what I love about the Olympics too, right? I don't watch curling most of the time, but when I'm zoned in when the Olympics are on, and I'm like, wait, this is the coolest thing. Handball, right? All of those other like offshoot sports, archery, that like you never watch, even like pole vaulting or something like that. Like I don't watch a whole lot of pole vaulting, but watching Mondo Duplantis these past Olympics break his own world record, that was the coolest thing ever. Those were such exciting moments, and it exposes you to sports that you don't get a chance to watch a whole lot of the time.
Yep. And like you said, I'm not a cycling, but like you said, just all of it, everything coming together, all the different sports, and that's what I think. Like you said, it makes it just fun to watch, even stuff that you wouldn't never watch in your in your everyday life, but you'll see that it's always awesome for sure. So, exactly, I want to get, and I'm always curious how everybody how they curate this list. As far as who is your Richmond Mount Rushmore of athletes that you've covered?
Of athletes that I've covered personally, I mean, obviously there are some historic ones that come to mind, right? Like Gerald Henderson from a VCU perspective. Shout out Eric Maynor, who just won an NBA title, right, as a coach for the Oklahoma City Thunder. Moses Malone at Petersburg, right? So many great athletes. I could keep going down the list with Richmond roots, Arthur Ashe. But I never covered any of those athletes directly. In the last 7 years, the ones that I've covered, Travion Henderson, I got to interview him at Hopewell when he committed to Ohio State. That was awesome. Those Hopewell teams were amazing. The program that the coach Ricky Irby runs down there is one of the best in the state. And Travion was also just a great kid. And he said some really cool stuff this past year at the national championship game before he got drafted. Oh, by the way, I'm a Patriots fan, so was incredibly excited about that. And so to have a Richmond area kid competing for my favorite team, I have a dynasty fantasy football team, and I don't have Travion, and I'm trying so hard to get him right now. I've sent like 10 trade offers to the guy who has Travion Henderson because I really want him on my team, right? Because having those local kids is the best. But he said a lot of great stuff about how his faith has influenced his athletic journey. And that I thought was really touching, coming from a background where he overcame some adversity as a young kid, and finding God and having that be a really positive influence in his life was really touching to me. And I thought he was a class act when I talked to him and interviewed him in his commitment. Harry Dalton as well, which a name that I'm sure over the past year, a lot of Richmond sports fans, if they weren't already familiar with, became familiar with. Dinwiddie quarterback is going to be a running back at Southern California at USC in his college career here. So watch out for him. So I think he's going to burst onto the national scene, and a lot of people around the country are going to be familiar with that name. He's the Richmond area's all-time leader in touchdowns accounted for. He broke Adam Morgan's record this past season. And so those two I'd put on there. From a basketball perspective, Armando Bacot was awesome as the All-Metro Player of the Year at Trinity. The Bacot family is outstanding. Watch out for King Bacot, by the way. who we just wrote about yesterday. He's going to go play at Petersburg for Ty White. That kid is special. Number 1 rated recruit in the class 2029, rising freshman in high school, started at Manchester Middle, stand out on the AAU circuit too. Very different player to Armando. He's not a big, he's a guard, but by all accounts, and I think Armando has said this himself, he's got a chance to be better than him. And that's a high bar because Armando is an amazing player and is an amazing player. Some other ones that I put up there, just, I mean, like favorite human beings that I've covered are coming to mind. Like Zeb Jackson, is just, dude, Zeb is so kind and such a genuine human being, was a wonderful ambassador for that program. From a competitive standpoint, Bones Highland, right? I think, and what he did with his VCU teams, and going on to the NBA would probably have to be on there. I was a freshman at VCU in 2015 when the baseball program made that super regional run. And so Sean Thompson, I'd say he was the head coach of the program now. I remember well, I met Sean at Cary Street Gym for the first time my freshman year. I had no idea who he was. It was the fall. It was before VCU went on that run. And I was playing pickup basketball at Cary Street. And this dude who was, I think, on the opposing team threw wound up and threw a full court pass, like a rifle down to the other end. And I played baseball in high school and I immediately saw that. And I was like, are you a pitcher? Like, I look like a baseball wind up to me. And he's like, yeah, I play for VCU. And then a few months later, I was watching Sean, pitch against Dallas Baptist in a super regional game. So I probably put him on that list. Maybe a deep cut here for a lot of people. Gudrun Hogramsdottir. I think I'm saying that right. Track and field athlete for VCU. Who set some national marks in throwing competitions at the NCAA track and field meet. This past year, actually, I think it was at the A10 tournament. I was talking to her on the phone, like in the basement of Capital One Arena, when I wanted to do a story on her because she just had an amazing NCAA track and field meet. And she's one of the best track and field athletes in VCU history. So that's another one that I'd throw out there. Britton Wilson definitely deserves to be on there. I'm glad I thought of that. Mills Godwin, track and field star, who went on to run at Arkansas in college, and was in the kind of the Olympic qualifying sphere. Super, super talented sprinter. Her and her mother, Luania, are amazing people. And then Kira D'Amato as well. I think would be the last one that I'd put on there. Marathoner, held the women's American marathon record for a short time a few years ago. I've interviewed her a few times. She raced in Boston this past year, probably like the superstar of the Richmond running community, and a globally elite marathoner. And she's a mother of 2 kids. So I interviewed her even, before she'd really broke onto the national scene about getting back to running after she was an All-American at American University, and then had a major injury at the end of college, had 2 kids, and really struggled for a little bit trying to get back into running and work through her injury. And after having 2 children, and the journey that she's made to go from being a mother who dealt with a major injury, who gave up the sport for a while, to one of the best marathoners in the world, has inspired my own running journey. And so Kira, I think, would definitely have to be on there. So that's the group, I'd say. Travion Henderson, Harry Dalton, Kira D'Amato, Britton Wilson, and Gudrun, I think would be my 5. Do I get 5 on Mount Rushmore?
You can, yeah. Hey, you can, absolutely. Okay. Yeah. So you're Patriot fan. So I definitely see a lot of promise in. So I'm a Carolina football fan. So any guy who played for University of North Carolina, I call him like my nephew. So Drake May is definitely in that nephew category, and I think he about to cook for your Patriots.
I think so too. He showed some flashes last year. We got to get him the weapons that he needs. I hope that Stephon Diggs still has it in him after the injuries that he's battled through. And then I'm blanking on the name. He's on my dynasty team. Who's the young receiver that we have that we drafted last year that showed some flashes too? I'm gonna have it here in a second because he's on my.
Is it to kill him? No, is it him? Oh no, it's the other. He was from. I know you talk about though.
I got you.
Is that to kill him?
Jalen Polk.
Oh. University of Washington. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mm-hmm. So I think we got to get Drake the weapons that he needs, but I like what I saw in flashes last year too. I think there's some Josh Allen there in terms of like has the scrambling ability too, can be elusive when he needs to be, but he's got a cannon of an arm. And a bit of a gunslinger mentality that's a lot of fun to watch. You know, you'll need him to protect the ball probably a little better, but that'll come with experience. And I believe in Mike Vrabel too, with his history as a coach. You know, was obviously a great player for the Pats in his own day, part of some of their best dynasty teams in the Belichick and Brady era. And so I think the over-under, we were having this conversation in the office the other day. You know what the Vegas over-under is for Patriots wins this upcoming season?
It's probably like 8.
It's 8.5. Yeah,
really?
good guess. I know that was right there. I think most people would have guessed lower after we struggled as much as we did last year. But I do think they're playing a last place schedule to this upcoming season, right? So the schedule is pretty light. And I think they can win 9-10 games. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. I think Vrabel is going to get the culture in the right place. I think May is going to continue to grow. It's just about protecting him is the most important thing, right? Because I was scared last year when you have a talented young quarterback like that. Like I always want my team to build up front first. Like give me the linemen to protect my young quarterback before you ask that young quarterback to grow, because that can really rattle a young quarterback's confidence, right? When you're getting knocked around all the time. And it's obviously just dangerous from a physical standpoint. And so I think we picked up some good line pieces in the draft this year and in free agency. And so I'm hoping they can give him the time that he needs to operate and the weapons to look downfield and to get open for him. Because I think he's got a high ceiling for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. He about to cook. So yeah, definitely shout out to Drake May. So yeah, man. So this wraps up episode 350. Zach, definitely appreciate you for coming through. Tell them where they can find you on social media and just plug away what you got.
I appreciate that, man. I'm at Zach Joachim on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it. I won't refer people to my Instagram, although if you want to go follow me on Instagram, go for it. But that's kind of Zach Unfiltered. That's my personal social media, not really my professional one. So if you want to laugh at a bunch of river pictures and shots of my dog and stuff, you can go follow my Instagram. But if you're looking for my coverage, it's Zach Joachim at Richmond.com. All the stories are on there, and I appreciate everyone supporting local journalism, man, and engaging with the coverage. It means the world to me every time anyone passes me on the street or pulls me aside at the Siegel Center and says thank you for the coverage or emails me and says they appreciate a story. I keep a Word document full of all the positive feedback on emails that I've gotten over the years, and I hope to like make a collage someday of that just to remind me of the impact that my journalism has had. And on tough days, I pull that up and I smile at it. So anyone that's ever said thank you for the coverage, it means the world. Thank you for reading and for supporting it. And yeah, Zach Joachim on Twitter or Zach Joachim at Richmond.com.
Yes, indeed. Once again, appreciate you for coming through, and I have a feeling that we'll have you on a few more times as we near the basketball season. But once again, definitely appreciate you for coming through.
Chris, you're the best. Thank you for having me, man.
Thank you.